Hi, welcome to the 12th installment of Drive Time with Mike, the lesson format we use at Walnut Street Church of Christ for our small groups known as Community Drive Groups. Thanks for riding with me today. It was raining when I was driving, and I didn't think it was safe for me to record the video, so I am at my destination. I thought I would just speak with you for a few moments while I had the time. Today, our lesson is not going to be anything that you haven't heard before, I am sure, but it is something that is so important that it bears reminding. So that's what we're going to look at today. We're going to look at Luke chapter 6, verses 1 through 11. Now, in our passage of scripture, Jesus is on one Sabbath going through a field with his disciples, and his disciples are hungry, and so they begin to pluck off some wheat and rub it between their fingers and eat the wheat. And the Pharisees happen to be there, which I kind of think is odd, but the Pharisees happen to be there, and they say to Jesus, "Why do your disciples do that which is unlawful on the Sabbath?" And what they mean is that by plucking the wheat and by rubbing it between their fingers to find the parts that they can eat, they're actually preparing food on the Sabbath, and they're not supposed to do that. And they want to know why Jesus' disciples are doing that. And so Jesus refers them back to a story with concerning King David. King David and his men are also hungry, and they go to the temple because they're on the run from Saul. They go to the temple. They ask the priest if he would give them something to eat, but he didn't have anything to give them. The only thing that was there was the bread of consecration, and that's a bread that nobody was allowed to eat except for the priest, and he was only allowed to eat it once new bread of consecration was made to replace the old bread. Then he can eat the old bread. But the priest, seeing that they are hungry, gives them the bread. So by law, there were several people who broke the law. The priest broke the law because he gave them the bread. David, he also broke the law by eating it, and so did his men that were with him. They broke the law also by eating the bread. But Jesus points back to this to say that God cares more about people than he does about our ritualistic practices. He cares more about people than he does ritualistic practice. Now, another Sabbath, probably the very next weekend, I'm not sure. It's another Sabbath. Jesus is in the synagogue, and he is teaching, which was his custom. And the Pharisees are there too. And they're looking for a reason to accuse him. They're looking for him to do something wrong so they can accuse him. Now, that brings up an interesting side point that I just want to mention to you. There are going to be times when you go to church and you don't like what's happening. You don't like what someone is saying, or you don't like how things are being done, or you don't like that there's a noisy kid in the church service. There's going to be something that happens that you don't like. And I know that when these things happen, we think the problem is whatever's bothering us. But the truth is this: the problem is you. Okay? You need to consider your priorities, and you need to consider your intentions. Because the problem really isn't whatever it is that's bothering you. If you love God, then you have to work through those things and focus on worshiping God regardless of what's going on in worship. When I was younger, I used to go to a church. I used to go to a church where the singing was really, really, really terrible. As a matter of fact, they had one speed and they had one spirit. They had the speed of a lullaby and they had the spirit of sleepiness with every single song that we sang. It was not very pleasant, and it may have been difficult for people like me who like more upbeat songs to worship God in that environment. But I found a way to worship God in that environment, and so did people like me. And that's what you have to do. Don't be like the Pharisees and go to church to look for everything that's wrong. Don't complain about everything you don't like. Learn how to worship God despite those things. Okay? Now, that's just a little side note. So they're looking for a reason. These Pharisees are looking for a reason to accuse Jesus And so they know that there's a man who's in the service who has a deformed hand, and they wonder if Jesus is going to heal this man on the Sabbath, which, oh, that would be terrible, right? So, and so Jesus perceives their thoughts, and he actually says, he actually calls the guy up who has the withered hand, the deformed hand, and he asks them a question. He says, "Is it good? Is it lawful to do good or evil on the Sabbath?" And then he heals the man's hand. Now, this makes them furious. The Pharisees, they are furious at Jesus, and they start trying to discuss what they might do. They were so mad. They missed the fact that God is gracious, that God will even bend or break his own rules because he cares about people. I think it's Mark chapter 2, verse 27, where Jesus said that the Sabbath was made for man, not the man for the Sabbath. Our rules, our laws, our regulations that Jesus gives us, that God gives us, they're to enhance life for us. They're to make life better for us. They are not above and beyond and more important than people. Now, you can tell when a church cares more about the rules than they do about people. You just listen to what the preacher preaches on Sunday mornings, or anytime he gets up there, and if he primarily focuses on the rules or why we're right or why everybody else is wrong or this is how you ought to think, and his lessons are more about that than they are about how to navigate relationships successfully, how to maximize your life through God's purpose and God's ways. If they're not about the mission of the church, which is to seek and save the lost, if it's not about spiritual growth or about social justice, you can tell that this church is more concerned about the rules than people. Same thing goes for the teachers that aren't the minister. You can tell what they're focused on. Now, I hope that as a church, and I hope that as individuals, we would give more priority and more concern to people than we would the rules. Rules are good. I'm not saying that we shouldn't have rules. I'm not saying that at all. But I am saying that even God himself and even Jesus Christ said that people are more important than the rules, and God is happy to serve people, even at the expense of some of his own ritualistic practices or own ritualistic rules that he has laid down in the laws. We must remember that people are more important than rules, or more important than our ritualistic practices. Now, I know everybody's heard that before, but again, it is worth repeating. And I hope that you'll consider it and reflect upon your life, reflect upon your walk with Jesus. Do you care more about people, or do you care more about your ways? Do you care more about people, or do you care more about having things your way? Do you care more about people, or do you care more about our rules that you think we're supposed to follow? Do you care more about people, or do you care more about your ritualistic practices, which is more important to you? And I hope that you side with Jesus, that people are more important than rules. Be blessed.